Before we start the video, just a quick heads up. This is part 7 in a series I'm doing covering the Super Monkey Ball franchise. It's not required, but I recommend checking out the previous chapters for additional context. With that being said though, hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to Fallout, a Super Monkey Ball retrospective. As I mentioned earlier, 2005 marked the end of what many would call the classic era of Monkey Ball. That includes 1, 2, Junior Deluxe, and Touch and Roll. Plus, of course, there were numerous side games created too. But the next game we're looking at doesn't really fit in the next era either. I suppose it could be considered the classic era, seeing as it was the last game released on 6th-gen consoles and reused some assets. But really, it's so far removed from any other game that it's easiest to just consider it as an addendum of sorts. See, SEGA knew that as great as the classic era was, they had essentially just recycled the same games for half a decade. So it was time to make something entirely new, not relying on AV's work this time. But that was still a ways away. In the meantime, they had a side project. SEGA of Europe was curious on how they could expand the franchise. If party games worked well, what other genres could be tapped into? Well, an adventure game might work. Heck, Monkey Ball 2 Story Mode already laid the groundwork for an actual world. So they decided to make one just to see what the franchise would look like. So while the Japanese team worked on the next game, they commissioned Traveler's Tales to take on what would become SMB Adventure. Now, if that name rings a bell, it's because they developed several licensed kids games, most notably the LEGO series. And to this day, that's what they're known for. And really, they could have done a lot worse here. Well, here's where things get complicated. See, TT's main team was working on other games at the time, so they handed the development off to their Oxford division. This alone wouldn't be a bad thing, but according to the director, SEGA had some pretty confusing guidelines, suggesting socio-economic and political issues to base the story around, instead of having traditional enemies. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but this is already sounding like a recipe for disaster. And not only that, but the game had a pretty tight deadline too. It was released in June of 2006 in PAL regions, and 2 months later in America, likely to beat the end of the generation. So we have a side branch of a studio, given ambiguous and inadvisable guidelines, all under a time limit. And the result? Super Monkey Ball Adventure for the GameCube, PS2, and PSP. I don't think many people played this one, as there's a lot less information or even opinion on this game. But one thing is for certain, those who have played it say it's dog water compared to the originals. So let's take a look at this game and see what makes it so divisive. I mean, it's made by the same company that made LEGO Star Wars 2, so it can't be that bad, right? Okay, just do the thing. So, like I said, the game takes the gameplay of Super Monkey Ball and tries to adapt it in a more open scenario. So instead of just running through small stages, you'll be exploring several larger worlds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the usual. How's the presentation? It looks fine. It doesn't look awful, I guess, but it reminds me of how SMB1 would purposely blur a little to reflect heat waves in the desert world, a game on the same console from 5 years earlier. No progressive scan either, which certainly doesn't help, and I can imagine this was because it was made with the PSP in mind. But especially on the GameCube, you've gotta wish for more. At least I can say that the art direction they went with here, while still looking a bit generic, is still cartoony enough to fit in the Monkey Ball world. Visuals aren't the only downgrade though. Remember how Pixel Pursuit said Deluxe on PS2 suffered from frequent loading issues? Yeah, that's an issue here too. And these things can last up to 20 seconds. It's not quite as bad as that game, but it can really kill the immersion when you're traveling from one part of the map to another and everything just stops and cuts to a loading screen. If you make a wrong turn and need to cross that loading zone again, forget it. And that's not even mentioning that all the original music here is pretty forgettable too. In fact, this is a sort of game where your mom would probably tell you to turn the TV down from across the house. Of course, there are some decent tracks here, but they're all borrowed from SMB1. I do like that they kept Brian Matt's iconic voice clips though, and instead of just having one clip for each scenario, there's more like 4 of each.
Ready? Go! Ready? Go! Ready? Go! Ready? Go!
And another thing I like are the character voices. It's gibberish just like in SMB2, but I appreciate that they slightly pitch them differently depending on the character. So while I do admit that this screams low-budget license game, it's not distractingly bad in most circumstances, it just feels kinda unpolished, especially when the skybox freaks out a bit every time you fall out. Well, let's get into the actual content of the game then. The obvious first mode is the story, and given SMB2 had a pretty fun story with just cutscenes, this mode is probably the most intriguing. I mean, you're going on a big adventure and using different chants to navigate puzzles. There's so much potential. Potential that is sadly very half-baked. So how the system works is that you're in your ball the entire time, and throughout the game, you'll learn different chants or abilities to expand your moveset. But what are you actually doing? Are you completing puzzles? Maybe the occasional boss fight? Well, the main gameplay does have some light platforming sections, but you'll mostly be doing side quests. So you'll be wandering around the world, doing small tasks to increase the amount of joy in that section. And once that joy reaches 60%, the main mission unlocks and you can complete the world. And these tasks range from doing a stealth rescue mission to picking up trash, so the moment-to-moment gameplay is kinda all over the place. And the worst part is that a lot of it isn't fun. For every genuinely good mission the game has, it seems there's another mission that's either completely forgettable or mind-numbingly tedious. I mean, just to give you a brief sample of what you'll be doing. In the same section, you'll be racing to take a photograph, punching bumper cars off the track to save the passengers, running around a giant maze collecting balloons, and running around that same maze picking up banana peels. And we all know how I feel about mazes. Again, this is just one section in the third world. And you know what? This section is more tolerable in a way, because there aren't many places to fall out. If you do fall out for any mission, you have to restart it by talking to the NPC that gave it to you. And keep in mind, your respawn point could be 2 feet away, or 100. So while I may have a genuinely fun time doing a mission here or there, a lot of it is forgettable at best, and frustratingly tedious at worst. Luckily, however, there is one saving grace this game has, and those are the puzzles. See, when exploring the different worlds, you'll come across these gates that bar your progress. In order to open them, you need to enter the puzzle realm and complete all but one of the corresponding stages. And these stages are exactly like they were in the original games. You just get from point A to point B in 60 seconds or less. These are easily the best parts of the game, because they throw out all the new stuff and just head back to the way the originals were. And even better, all of them are completely new. Sure, the concepts are familiar, but still, it's really refreshing. Actually, if you think about it, this is the first game with all original stages since SMB2. I mean, yeah, there are only 50 of these, but that's still okay because in a Void, they're meant to complement the gameplay, not be the sole focus. And for those of you who preferred one style of stage design, you'll be happy to know that there aren't any big gimmicks here either. But they still get pretty creative, like this one stage where you have to mix timing with momentum to reach the goal. I also appreciate how the background changes to fit your current scenario, and some environments like the night sky look really nice. And as a side note, another small detail I love is how this castle guard introduces a realm as this dangerous place where your very life is in jeopardy. It explains why our heroes are the only ones to go there, and small world building stuff like that is always cool. But of course, these pockets of joy are short-lived before you jump back to the same gameplay as before. Wander around, do random quests, occasionally learn a new spell. Oh yeah, let's talk about those. Throughout the game, you'll come across this mysterious character in a red jumpsuit. I wonder who it could be. And it will often give you a chant to help you out. Think of these like the songs from Zelda Wind Waker. Each chant consists of 4 syllables: I, woo, yay, or poo. For example, to make your ball wooden, the spell would be woo woo I, or the hover spell is yay yay poo. Now, you'd think Poo would do something special since that was a spell in the first game, but nope, it doesn't do anything. But you will build up a small arsenal of these. Some will teleport you to different worlds, some will change the objects you can interact with, and some just give you different abilities. There's some good potential here. But like with the story mode itself, potential is as far as it really goes. Let me explain what I mean. These chants are not tools to solve puzzles, at least for the most part. They're simply keys to unlock progress gates. Is there a giant piece of ice blocking a cannon? Good thing you just learned the wood spell, and once you know it, almost all the missions after require the wood ball. Did you learn the sticky ball? Great, now you can climb up walls and stuff, right? Well, yes, but only in specifically marked areas that take out any guesswork. Otherwise, have fun using it to pick up trash. Not to mention, when you do get to use it, the physics are really janky. I swear, this single room has to be the most infuriating part of the entire game. Oh cool, you learn how to grow in size? Well, you once again use it in a few specific situations. And that's basically the case for every ability here. It's painfully obvious what you need to do. Oh sure, there are some puzzles, but they're the exception, and most of the time I'm using the term puzzle generously. Like, take this one instance where you need to derail a roller coaster. Do you punch it off? Nope. Do you grow in size and slow it down from the front? No. Oh, well then obviously you need to run up to it from behind and bump into it. Because that's how physics works. And because almost every mission in the game requires one chant or another, you're just cycling through all your options until you realize the answer doesn't require chants at all. Now, there is one last ability which isn't really a chant, but is equally circumstantial. Throughout the different worlds, you'll come across these red rings, and when you fall or shoot through them, you gain the ability to temporarily fly. These aren't really used for puzzles, but it's a fun transportation method and even has a couple side missions. Actually, it's probably my favorite ability next to the hover ball. And while I'm talking about things I like, I feel like I should point out that switching between abilities is pretty seamless. Plus, you can look up any chant from the pause menu. And they even thought to include a redial button, which just enables your last chant. I'm kinda reaching here, but hey, credit where it's due. Those were some good features. Overall though, the concept of abilities was pretty cool, but definitely could have been more fully realized, particularly with the overworld puzzles. Either there's zero thought required, or the answer is so obtuse that you may as well just pull up a guide. Again, it's a shame too because I really think they could have been put to better use here. Oh well. Overall, the story mode just feels unpolished. The loading screens are everywhere, the music isn't even properly looped, so it just fades out sometimes, or won't load at all, and if that wasn't enough, the collision loves to be wonky too. I don't know how many times I got stuck on a piece of geometry, or a bouncy flower didn't work, or I somehow fell off a pipe I was climbing and had to start over again. I was so glad when I got the hover power up because it meant I could avoid a decent amount of these issues. Seriously, I can't emphasize this enough. This gameplay could have been good, but it's filled with these countless issues from the presentation to the design of the game itself. But let's move on from the gameplay, because even a game like Super Paper Mario had redundant gameplay, but was still saved by its story. So what did Traveler's Tales come up with? Well, it's certainly something. Real quick, I'm pretty much going to be spoiling everything here. It really is nothing special, but just in case, I'll give you a timestamp to skip to if you want. The story is about the Super Monkey Ball gang from the first two games. They're enjoying a nice barbecue when a glider crash lands on Jungle Island. It turns out it's the prince and princess from two faraway nations, Monkeytropolis and Kongri-La. Unfortunately though, despite their love for each other, their nations are in perpetual war. So your job is to travel the monkey world, which might I add is a whopping 4 places, 5 if you're generous, to gather attendees for a wedding to reunite the nations. Excuse me, what? What is this story doing in a monkey ball game? And I'm not even leaving out that many details. The subplots don't really advance the story too much either. Like in Moonhaven, the next world, you're trying to persuade the main leader to attend the wedding. But there's a problem. See, there are 2 species of monkeys who live here, Big Uns and Little Uns. And the Big Uns have a giant supremacy complex against the other guys, and so they can't leave the city or else it might get destroyed or something? I honestly don't know. They allude to some kind of monsters or something, but it's never specified anywhere, even the manual. So your job is to convince the big uns to, not be jerks. It's a pretty whatever subplot. But at least the world has some interesting side quests, and it actually does feel the most like a Monkey Ball stage. Pretty bad room layout though. But on to the next world, a theme park called Zootopia. If only SEGA had bothered to trademark that name while they had the chance. It's normally a place of joy, but the owners built a robot to maximize customer satisfaction, and it locked the gates until every visitor was 100% satisfied. Well, 6 weeks later, people are still trapped and aren't exactly satisfied. So you've got to help fix up the park, all while the robot sits in his control tower waiting for you. Okay, that's more like it. This subplot is actually interesting. And surprise, surprise, it falls flat on its face. You finally climb the tower after dying like 20 times to clunky physics, and confront the tyrant, by completing a trivial puzzle and turning off the power. But at least the gates are open and everyone is free to go. Except, get this, they don't. They all just stay there. I mean, I know they wanted an excuse to not change the map, but you're telling me that people have been trapped here for weeks, and then they just decide to stay after all? That's just bad writing! And they try to pull off this moral conclusion like, joy is something that should be felt from the heart instead of measured by robots, or something, but it really doesn't do anything. This plot has got to be the most disappointing part of the entire game. It's like the writers were trying to make it as anticlimactic as possible. And the world, it's perfectly fine. Half the areas are okay, but I've already spoken my mind about the other parts. But I'm starting to ramble, so let's get back on track. Last of all, you travel to the warring cities of Monkeytropolis and Shangri-La to end their feud. This whole subplot is pretty stupid though. It pulls a whole deal where you help one side, then it tries to guilt you for doing so. And the entire conflict is a really stupid misunderstanding too. Basically, Monkeytropolis thinks all the residents of Shangri-La are monsters because they're wearing masks. So they constantly blast loud noises to scare them away. But all this does is drive everyone on the other side to keep their masks on to block out the noise, instead of, covering their ears. They also steal the sun in retaliation. Somehow. So naturally, you gotta show both sides that their war is based on a stupid misunderstanding. Once that's cleared up, the two kings give their children their blessing to be married. I do like though how they put the two nations on the same map, and the widened scope of the area makes it probably the best place out of anywhere. So you all go back to Jungle Island, you start the wedding, and that's the end. Well, except for the extra cutscene if you 100% everything, but we'll touch on that in a sec. But in case you couldn't tell, I do not think the story is remarkable at all. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the naysayers. There are these enemies that are supposedly the embodiment of the world's fear or sorrow or something, but they basically have no influence on the plot. But why not? I mean, why not have them as bosses? You could have had them influencing the minds of the park owners or the big uns or something. That would have at least been interesting. Certainly better than just randomly placing them in the overworld as a minor inconvenience. Who knows, maybe SEGA didn't want bosses straight up. It certainly wouldn't be surprising based on their guidelines. But regardless, my point is that this mode does almost nothing extra to keep itself interesting. Like, as an example, why is it that after you complete a character's mission, they never speak to you again? Even after you finish a world, everyone just stands there saying nothing, which makes all the characters outside the main cast pretty forgettable. Sometimes the mission's text is pretty funny, but that's only a few sentences. Not much room to leave anything more than an impression. This is a story, and not only that, it's the first in-depth one of the series. World building is important here, and outside of a few scenarios, it can feel like they were doing the bare minimum. But anyway, let's shift gears, because there's more to SMBA than just a story. As you might expect, there's mini-games here too, 6 of them in fact. Interestingly enough, they're all unlocked from the start, but if you collect bananas in story mode, you can buy extra maps, modes, and characters. What a neat idea! It's a little like how you'd unlock mini-games using play points in the originals. And by the end, you've got a huge roster of characters, whether they be the main cast or regular NPCs from the story mode. But now, let's go over my quick opinions on each game. Monkey Race. I think we all know what to expect by now. You can unlock new courses at the shop, but they're all pretty similar. That being said, I like their designs more than the originals as their layouts account a lot more for the loose turning. Plus, there's some fun new items in here too, like a grapple that lets you slingshot past other players. Honestly, this might be my favorite version so far. Monkey Target. Instead of using the map designs from the originals, these ones are all new, even if they share the jungle theme. The game lists 4 sets of 4 levels to play, but I'm pretty sure these sets are basically identical. But seeing as 1 and 2 only had 3 maps each, it's technically more content. I just find it kinda weird. Monkey Fight. It's like the version from Deluxe, except with new maps based on the 4 worlds. Sure, the stages don't crumble in survival mode, but it's still pretty neat. Monkey Bounce. It's like a game of Reversi, but instead of using individual pieces, you're bouncing on a floating board and changing the color of the tiles themselves. Add in items and things can definitely get hectic. It's not a bad game, but it's not exactly one I'm anxious to go back to. Monkey Cannon. Each player has a tower, and everyone's focus is doing as much damage as possible until only one person's tower is left standing. The more bricks you break down from the 3 other towers, the more points you'll earn. It's alright, but it got kinda boring after a couple rounds. You can choose between different tower formations, but I never found it changed the game that much. You can also unlock a last man standing mode through the shop, and this allows you to even set up tower defense systems, but it's still just okay. I don't know, maybe I'm just bad. Monkey Tag. It's not what it sounds like. There are actually 2 modes here. In Balloon Bump, your job is to grab as many red balloons as possible to rack up points. You can also use items to either set traps for other players or give yourself ammunition to get small points on the side. In the unlockable Balloon Burglar, it's a little more complicated. Instead of simply needing to touch the balloons, you need to carry them to the goal. If you get hit by another player though, you'll lose it and need to get another. Really, both of these modes present interesting ideas, and if they are expanded with different maps, maybe using a more open arena format, it would be pretty fun. As it stands now, it's nothing crazy, but it's probably the best new minigame here. So as you can see, I really don't mind a lot of the minigames for the most part. Yeah, not all of them are bangers, but overall, if I had this game as a kid, I could see myself having a fun time with these. Now, saying these are better than 2 selection is a big stretch. 1, maybe it's all down to preference at that point. I do like the variety in these modes though, and the fact that so much of these games, from modes to stages to characters, are unlockable, really gives you an incentive to play story mode. And if I was feeling extra malicious, I'd say it might be a better incentive than the story itself. Plus, even if this wouldn't be my go-to multiplayer game, I can't knock the fact that this is the only mode that supports it. The only big problems I have, in fact, are that they're hit with a long loading screen curse too, even in between individual rounds if you're switching maps. But that's more a critique of the overall game itself. Also, as far as I know, it's impossible to unlock everything in one go of the story, so you'll actually need to play it a couple times if you want to get everything. I guess if multiple people were playing this game though, it would go faster, but still. So anyway, that's the minigame mode. The last thing we have here though is challenge mode. It's pretty much what you'd expect. There's 3 standard difficulties, beginner, advanced, and expert, each corresponding to different locations in the story. These stages are all ripped from story mode, so there's really nothing new here, but again, in a Void, this is assigned mode now, so it isn't the biggest issue. Plus, this is probably the only mode where you aren't constantly bombarded with loading screens. There's one when you first start the mode, but after that, it's smooth sailing all the way to the end. And although a large chunk of the difficulty is due to the controls not being the same as the originals, I'm glad that at least takes some effort to reach the end of Expert. I mean, yeah, there aren't any extra stages, so finishing without a continue doesn't do much, but still. Again, there isn't really too much to talk about since it's a side mode, but you know what? It's fine for what it is. And that's it for the base version of Monkey Ball Adventure. The minigames and challenge mode are alright, but the story, which is what the game was even named after, is not that good. But before we close the book on this, you probably caught something I said just now, the base version. See, remember how I said the game was released on the GameCube, PS2, and PSP? Well, it turns out that the PSP, and technically the PS2, have some exclusive content. Luckily, most of it is nothing to get too upset about, but still, it's a bit sad that GameCube users got shafted again. I mean, Monkey Ball 3 getting cancelled is hard enough, and now with Adventure, the GCN port doesn't even have all the content. But maybe that's my Nintendo bias speaking. But do you want to know what the icing on this cake is? Not only is there missing content, but this version also has terrible controls. For some reason, we're locked to 8 directions. Not 360, not even 12 like in Deluxe. 8. As in the same amount of directions that Junior and Touch and Roll had. Except with those games, it was understandable since you were using a D-pad. Why would they cut the directions down this much, especially when the GameCube version was using the same controller as SMB 1 and 2? This single-handedly makes an otherwise mediocre game infuriating, especially in Moonhaven when the camera just loves to whip around a tight corner for a pre-scripted segment. Even the challenge stages suffer, as you can't make nearly the amount of precise movement as the other games. The one thing in the control scheme's favor is that the camera is now somewhat controllable in certain sections. Which, to be fair, is something the originals didn't do, so that's kinda cool. That certainly doesn't make up for the jank movement though. But now, let's see if the PS2 and PSP do any better. I mean, I guess they figured they need to give people an incentive to buy the alternate versions, but still, nobody's gonna see 15 extra levels and decide to pick up a PSP, right?
Hello, Ninjastar Compass here, and I'm a proud owner of every Monkey Ball game released in the US. And yes, that includes the PS2 and PSP versions of Adventure.
Why am I not surprised? Well, since you're here anyway, mind telling the good people about the version differences?
Sure, I guess. Now I think we should start with the smaller but still noticeable changes in the PS2 version of the game, namely the graphical differences. For example, in the cutscenes, characters actually show more emotion in their facial expressions. This is mostly seen with the smiling animation that honestly creeps me out a little bit. But even more subtle details like blinking seem to only be in the PS2 version of this game, so that's interesting. Monkey Ball Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 have more in common than we would think. Another difference is that the PS2 version of this game actually has better visual effects, like how the invisible actually distorts the background behind it instead of just making the model really transparent, which honestly I think is a nice touch. It looks much better. There is ever minor stuff like how the black and white effect while near enemies doesn't affect eye, and also doesn't make the screen really blurry unlike the GameCube version. Also, the photo.cc take stays full quality in the PS2 version of the game, rather than being a blurry mess like on other consoles. The most interesting difference I found is that the PS2 version actually has its own unique challenge mode backgrounds. Originally, before it was a sunset over the water, it was actually a cloudy sky. I assume they changed it just to add some variety to the level backgrounds, but honestly I would have preferred if they used both because the game is lacking level backgrounds in general. And finally, the most important one, the loading screen for challenge mode has a white background instead of being the normal one. I know, I can't believe it either. Alright, enough playing around. I've been annoying the giant crank in the room. Yeah, these. You might have been wondering what these have been doing just sitting around in the loading zones between the different areas. Well, the PS2 version of this game is unique from the others since it has no loading screens between the areas. And they achieved this by having the player turn a crank 10 times in order to open the gate. As you can imagine, this approach raises a lot of problems. The first of which being how long this takes. Loading screens that would normally take 10 to 20 seconds will now take over 40 seconds regularly. You can really feel every excruciating turn of this crank as it slowly raises. This addition is equally as pointless as it is annoying to deal with. Like, sure, I'll give them credit, it does somewhat feel like each area is one interconnected section, but the way this is achieved is so transparently just hiding loading screen with busy work that it loses its appeal almost instantly. Not to mention that if you're just trying to get from one end of a world to the other, having to go through like 2 or 3 cranks can be impressively tedious. Thankfully, for most of those, you can just hold one direction on the joystick and let the crank turn itself so you can zone out. But then of course the game has to have rooms where the camera is locked instead, meaning you have to pay full attention to your movement, otherwise you'll accidentally move off the crank and then make the process take even longer. The devs must have noticed how well received this crank system would have been, since in the GameCube and PSP port of the game, they just slap on a loading trigger near where the crank would be. Bam, now you just load to the next area instead. You can tell just how last minute this change was, since you can still see the crank clear as day, which I find really amusing. This is showcased perfectly in Zootopia, where in the PS2 version of the game you have to go down a specific route in order to reach the roller coaster room since there's a puzzle gate in the way. But in the GameCube and PSP versions, the loading screen takes you right past the room. So if you enter backwards on the PS2, you have to do the whole crank all over again just to turn around. The funny thing about the whole crank situation is that in Moonhaven the game replaces them with elevators, which is a much better way to hide the loading that doesn't require spinning on a stupid crank 10 times. Alright, thinking about that is starting to get me mad, so let's just see what the PSP version brings to the table. Well, seeing as it's a portable console, it's obviously going to be less powerful than a PS2 is, so you think it wouldn't hit 60 FPS, and well, you'd be right. This is impressively bad. Even 30 would have been passable, but it can't even do that. So yeah, the PSP version of Adventure seems to suffer from Sonic Unleashed syndrome. This version of the game is still playable, but the frame rate makes it way more of a chore to do literally anything. We experience the same amazing missions from console Adventure with the added fun of constant slowdown. Woo! Woo, let's go. I swear that certain mechanics of the game are tied to the frame rate, since things like the puzzle gates take way longer to open on PSP. Yup, I'm just sitting here waiting. Thankfully, the challenge mode in PSP actually runs fine for the most part. Speaking of the challenge mode, the PSP version of this game actually has an exclusive difficulty mode called Exclusive. Very creative, guys. This mode is very alright, I guess. I know you're all scrambling to buy a copy of this for 15 levels, but you might want to reconsider. Because although there are some interesting ones here and having the exclusive content is nice and all, the majority of the new stages are okay at best, and for the most part feel like scrap levels that they put together last minute to add as a selling point. Not to mention how awful it would be to put in the effort to suffer through Expert on the PSP version just to get to these stages. I mean, who would do that anyway? I definitely wouldn't do it at all. I do find it really funny to capture the flags in an exclusive level considering how much it kills the frame rate, like it's struggling trying to exist in this port. The extra challenge mode isn't the only feature that's exclusive to the PSP version, since I guess the devs knew how much this port sucked and they had to add more content to entice people to buy it. One feature that is actually really interesting is that you can cross-save with the PS2 version of this game. Yeah, if you plug your PSP into the PS2, you can actually share save data between the two versions. So if you're going on a road trip and for some reason want to play Monkey Ball Adventure, you can take your save data with you too. Honestly, this feature alone may save the PSP version of this game, at least in my opinion. Not only is portability a nice feature that can't be undermined, but it also means that if I get stuck, I can just beat that portion of the game on the PS2 instead. Now granted, you would need to have owned both consoles and 2 copies of the game, but it's still a great addition, even if you have to deal with the PSP jank along the way. Another interesting addition is an exclusive minigame to the PSP version called Monkey Trump. What is Monkey Trumps? Well, it's a multiplayer card game minigame that uses cards of the characters found in the game, which are actually scattered around the PSP overworld. Honestly, it's a nice bonus collectible. Too bad it's only in this version, although certain cards can only be collected by certain characters, which is really annoying. Thankfully, you can just use a cheat code to unlock them all, so that's good for lazy people like me. There are actually some monkey characters that only appear in card form, which is pretty interesting. You can actually view these cards in the options menu and they have some absolutely amazing descriptions, like Dada's for example.
Dada brought his top hat from Dove in Zootopia. He hides important things under it for safekeeping. The problem is, not everything he puts in comes out again, and some things comes out he doesn't expect.
Oh, alright, doesn't seem that odd, not sure what's up with that, except for the fact that his daughter Toot Toot stays under his hat. So what does that imply then, huh? Someone needs to call Child Protective Services, I swear. I got sidetracked for a bit. Anyway, onto the gameplay of Monkey Trumps. This mode is actually pretty undocumented, since it requires 2 consoles and 2 copies of the game in order to play. Honestly, who's gonna buy 2 PSPs and 2 copies of Adventure just for the sake of documentation? So I bought a second PSP for this.
Of course you did.
You better be happy. Alright, so there are 3 different modes you experience with this, so let's start with the most exciting one, Swap Trumps. As you can probably guess, this is a mode where you can swap trump cards with another player. There's not even any music, it's literally just trading cards in silence. This is kind of a pointless feature unless you really want to own a full deck of 64 future eyes like I do. Even if this feature was fully developed, I don't really see much appeal to it since it requires someone to not only own the PSP version of Adventure, but also to know every people who own a PSP Adventure and would be willing to trade cards, which sounds like a pretty rare event if you ask me. Alright, enough stalling, time for the actual card games. Let's start with Chief Chimps. At first looking at this, you might have no idea what is happening, and yeah, that's because this game doesn't really explain what the rules are at all. But after a quick peek at the instruction manual, the game works like this. The play that starts is given a character at random, and you have to select one of the 6 attributes that the specific character has listed. Why? Well, the goal is to try to pick the attribute that you think will be higher or lower than the other player's randomly chosen character. The game indicates this with text next to the attributes that says low or high, you know, in the most non-obvious way possible. If you manage to guess correctly, the game will show you this amazing winner text in a nice green Arial font, which just looks absolutely stunning. Great job, devs. There is a similar red loser and tie text, and if you manage to lose, the winner will take a card from the losing player. And once someone has obtained all of the cards, they win the game. There's also an anti-option, which makes losing cards disappear from the match, which does help make the matches quicker, since as you can probably imagine, matches of cheap chimps can last quite a while. I found myself getting bored of this mode extremely quickly, mainly since the presentation is so bland. The generic fonts, the lack of music, it's also uninteresting to look at. Monkey Mayhem is a little more involved. It plays mainly the same as Chief Chimps, except you have to pick 6 cards at once, and the game gives you 8 cards to pick from, so there's actually some sense of strategy to this one. This also means that the matches are much shorter than in Chief Chimps, although I would argue that they're still way too long unless you adjust the card count. I love how much the images of the characters are squished whenever it shows all 6 of these selected cards at once. That's pretty great.
Yeah, very interesting.
Wait, are you seriously zoning out on me?
I mean, no, not at all. please continue.
Whatever, anyway, it's pretty clear that all the Monkey Trump minigames are an afterthought meant to add as a selling point. The really basic presentation and how basic the actual card games are, just so I can reuse the cards of the characters without having to create any new assets. With that in mind, this is an okay mode, I guess, but it's not really worth going out of your way to play or anything, let alone buying a second PSP for. May my money rest in peace. To finally finish off the segment, another exclusive PSP feature is actually some exclusive characters. Let's start with Future II, who is present in the other versions of the game, but is only playable in the PS2 and PSP versions of the game. Now, I'm not 100% sure how to unlock Future II since that's not concretely known, but I'm pretty sure you unlock Future II by transferring data between the PS2 version and the PSP version of the game. Either way, aside from being a cool new character to play as in challenge mode, why go through the effort? Well, Future II actually acts as a new game plus for the story mode, since he starts to full of the chance aside from the world chance, so you can go through the whole game without having to backtrack, which is actually a nice feature. Although it's a shame that's again locked away from the GameCube version of the game for some odd reason. Lastly, let's talk about the one that only appears in the story mode and is known as the Mysterious Traveler. Now, who is this traveler and what is his purpose in the game? Well, as it turns out, they are intended to be a post-game NPC you can interact with. You'll hang out in areas that are inaccessible unless you lock the chance them later in the game. You'll see him standing around doing nothing until you approach him and read what he has to say.
Oh yeah, cause that'll convince everyone to buy a PSP.
Well, actually, Kardino, as it turns out, this character exists to explain crucial plot information about the entire Monkey Ball franchise.
So, you're telling me that not only does the GameCube version have worse controls, but they cut lore out too?
Oh, and it gets worse. What they cut out is an extremely detailed and thorough explanation of the story from both Monkey Ball 1 and 2, along with an origin story of Dr. Bad Boon and his assistant, all told through a tiny text box going down a 480 by 272 screen. In order to get the full story, you have to find them in each of the worlds, and there is a lot of story to read. There are paragraphs upon paragraphs of stuff to read, which begs the question of why is it only in the PSP version of this game when it seems like it's literally crucial to understanding the plot of the whole game. Well, I personally believe that was actually supposed to be cut from the final version of the game, but was left over or reworked in order to be in the PSP version, either by accident or on purpose to add some more exclusive content. I have some evidence to support this claim. The PSP version of the game was actually finished a month earlier than the other versions of the game, which could have given them time to remove it from the other version at the last minute, but the main reason why I believe this is because Dr. Bad Boon being mentioned. Now, it's true that Monkey Ball 2 is explicitly mentioned in the intro of the game, so him being mentioned wouldn't be too far-fetched as is, but what is off about his mention is that the game also brings up a character named Hee, which is explained by the Mysterious Traveler as the past version of Bad Boon. This, alongside a past version of his assistant, were actually cut from the game at some point according to Keith Webb on Twitter. Since Monkey Ball Adventure was supposed to be a prequel to Monkey Ball 2 at some point rather than a sequel, and the Mysterious Traveler is the last remaining proof of this concept in the final game. It's even heavily rumored that this Traveler is actually Baby from the future, which is a really interesting idea that I wish was more fleshed out than just being a random NPC to talk to. Unfortunately, all we are left with is a lost potential and a strange addition to an odd port, all things considered. I honestly think having this character as a post-game award would have been nice if the rest of this game wasn't such a mess. That is the end of this way too long ramble about all of the version differences with Super Monkey Ball Adventure. Thanks for having me on, Kardino. Now get back to predicting Mario Kart 9 or whatever you do on this channel.
Thanks, I think. Of course, I'll leave a link to Ninja's channel in the description. But as you can see, while GameCube users were definitely missing out on substantial content, a lot of it was kinda garbage anyway, and the Mysterious Traveler dialogue can just be found on the wiki, which I guess is for the better. Super Monkey Ball Adventure is a very interesting game, and I know that is probably the most generic thing I've said this entire video. But I truly can't think of no other way to sum it up. It has pretty good mini-games, and the challenge mode is decent enough, but the main appeal of the game is a different story. Pun intended. There were several factors in its favor, but whether because the team was given a bad premise or because of time restraints, story mode just feels like an incoherent mess. There were instances where I was having a pretty good time, but with the mediocre story, the subpar gameplay, and the various problems for each platform, SMBA ensures that any fun you might have is short-lived. Is it a bad game? Yes, not even comically so. But if you look underneath that pile of wasted potential, you can see a glimmer of what they were going for. It's just that it's like finding one ripe banana in a pile of rotten ones. Like, I gotta emphasize again, I don't mind Monkey Ball having a story, but in 2, it didn't take itself so seriously. It had fun with itself. Adventure, however, feels much more generic and shows perhaps the most boring gameplay loop I can think of. But really, I can only partially blame the developers, and I feel that the story mode was somewhat doomed from the start. given the same guidelines and scenario they were, how much better could anyone have done? For what it's worth, I think if they revisited this concept, they could make something much better than what we have here, but as it stands, you can see why I said it didn't really fit in with the older games in the series, despite sharing the same art style. And with the newer games, all I'll say for now is that the only thing it shares with them is the new logo. But before we move on, I suppose now that we have all the pieces in place, it's time to now talk about the official story spanning Monkey Ball 1, 2, and Adventure. Are you ready? Because this is gonna be a wild ride. Like, seriously, it's some wacky stuff. Okay, here goes. Ai and Mimi lived on Jungle Island and fell in love. But one day, Gon, a pirate from a faraway island, invaded their home and stole all the bananas. So Ai went off to find more fruit for the village. But one night he fell asleep and a voice echoed in his head telling him of a tower of many labyrinths. And on the other side, a banana temple with an endless supply of potassium. It also told him of the magical spell, Ai Poo, that would give him assistance in clearing these challenges. So when Ai woke up, he journeyed through the tower and cleared the many floors it presented him with. Little did he know though that Gon was following him and also learned this spell. So when Ai finally reached the temple, Gon pushed him out of the way and barged in. However, the temple collapsed and he was trapped. Ai, being the gracious monkey that he was, decided to help Gon and the two became good friends. Back in the village, Ai and Mimi were being harassed by a local bully who was jealous of the two's relationship. But Gon, now ever loyal to Ai, would get into trouble defending them from his schemes. And so it was that Ai and Mimi grew up and got married, eventually having baby. Meanwhile, Ai and Gon started a successful company and even created replicas of the balls which the spells had given them back in the day. And as for the bully, well, he became a scientist and eventually became Dr. Bad Boon. One night, he built a time machine so that he could convince past Mimi to marry him. But Baby was watching and, unable to talk yet, failed to warn his parents. So he decided to grab a prototype ball and sneak after Bad Boon. And when he stepped into the portal, he found himself face to face with past Ai and Mimi. And now comes the events of Super Monkey Ball 1 on the GameCube. Using the prototype ball that Baby brought, they all repeated the prior events. But Bad Boon still had his eye on Mimi, and soon after they returned from the Banana Temple, he attacked the village, thus leading to the events of Super Monkey Ball 2. Bad Boon was defeated and the village was saved. Finally, the events of Monkey Ball Adventure took place before the secret cutscene at the end. It turns out that future Ai came back for Baby and helped the gang all along by teaching them spells along the way. And now that the adventure has ended, he takes back the prototype so as not to create a time paradox, gives Ai and Gon the blueprints for the invention, and returns home with Baby to his own timeline. What a ridiculously wacky story. This thing is like a fanfic, probably because Traveler's Tale made half of it up as a way to justify future Ai being there, which itself was the result of a joke by one of the designers. Only a portion was actually in the canonical lore book they got from AV. What a way to tie everything together. And what's even crazier is that it was at least partially reconfirmed via the Japanese Twitter account. But anyway, that was the mess of a game that was Super Monkey Ball Adventure. But not many people paid attention because a few months later, a new game would release that would completely steal the show and welcome in a new era of Monkey Ball. But did it carry the series to new heights or let the fans down? Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.